Humans did not evolve to stay awake for long. This is an uncomfortable truth, because intelligence made us believe we could escape biological limits. Many animals can function with fragmented sleep. Some remain alert while resting, and some never fully lose awareness. But humans collapse when sleep is reduced, not because the body fails first, but because the mind does. Memory weakens, emotions lose shape, judgment becomes unreliable, and reality itself feels less stable. This is not a flaw of modern life. It is an ancient cost written into the human brain. Intelligence did not make humans stronger. It made them dependent on a fragile balance that must be restored every night. Sleep is not rest for humans. It is survival maintenance for a brain that cannot remain conscious without breaking down. And the question is not why humans sleep so much, but why the most intelligent species evolved in a way that makes wakefulness so difficult to sustain. The human brain was never designed to be idle. And this is where the need for sleep quietly begins. Compared to other species, the human body looks ordinary, even fragile. It consumes an unusually large amount of energy, not only when a person is thinking actively, but even when the body is completely still. When a human sits, rests, or lies down without moving, the brain does not slow in the way many animal nervous systems do. It continues to organize memories, replay past experiences, evaluate meaning, and anticipate what might come next. This constant activity is not accidental. It is the result of how humans evolved. Early humans survived not because they were fast or strong, but because they could remember patterns, predict danger, and plan beyond the present moment. That ability required a brain that remained alert even in moments of physical stillness. Other species can reduce neural activity safely when movement stops because their survival depends mostly on immediate response. Humans depend on interpretation, memory, and awareness, which keeps the brain engaged regardless of physical demand. Over long periods, this creates a quiet biological pressure. Energy is consumed continuously. Small inefficiencies build up, and mental balance becomes harder to maintain. This is why a human can feel tired after doing very little, while an animal may rest without consequence. The difference lies not in effort, but in design. The human brain is structured to carry information across time, linking past and future in a single moment of awareness. That design has a cost. It prevents the brain from entering a low-demand state while awake, and it makes prolonged wakefulness expensive. From an evolutionary perspective, this was acceptable because early humans lived within strict natural rhythms. Darkness arrived, activity slowed, and sleep followed naturally. The brain relied on these periods of shutdown to recover from continuous awareness. Without them, the system becomes strained. This strain is not dramatic at first. It appears as subtle fatigue, reduced clarity, or emotional imbalance. But it reflects a deeper truth about human origins. Intelligence did not free humans from biological limits. It tied them more tightly to them. The very feature that allowed humans to survive and adapt also created a dependence on regular, deep sleep. Other species can remain functional with less rest because their brains do not carry the same burden of constant awareness. Humans cannot escape this burden because it is the foundation of who they are. From the beginning, the human brain has demanded periods of complete disengagement to remain stable. Sleep exists not as comfort, but as a necessary response to a brain that never truly stops working while awake. Self-awareness. This ability allows humans to observe their own thoughts, reflect on their actions, and imagine themselves across time. While this capacity helped early humans survive by learning from past mistakes and anticipating future danger, it also created a constant internal activity that does not switch off while awake. When the body is still, the brain does not follow. It continues to evaluate identity, replay social interactions, measure personal success or failure, and search for meaning. In evolutionary terms, this meant that humans carried their environment inside their minds, even when the external world was quiet. Other species can enter a low-demand state while awake because their nervous systems are designed for immediate response rather than reflection. Once a threat is gone, their internal activity drops. Humans do not experience this release in the same way. Awareness keeps the brain engaged, even in safety. This persistent engagement requires energy and stability, and it gradually creates pressure inside the system. Over time, small inconsistencies appear in emotional control, attention, and judgment. These are not signs of illness, but natural consequences of a brain that must constantly interpret itself. Early humans lived in conditions where this pressure could be relieved regularly. Nightfall reduced stimulation, social interaction paused, and sleep followed naturally. The brain relied on these cycles to reset itself from continuous awareness. In the modern world, however, wakefulness is extended far beyond what the brain originally adapted to handle. The self-aware mind remains active late into the night, carrying unresolved thoughts forward without release. This creates a growing need for deeper and longer sleep to restore balance. The important point is that this need did not originate in modern stress or technology. It began when humans first became capable of thinking about themselves. Self-awareness increased survival, but it also increased vulnerability. It tied mental stability to regular periods of unconsciousness. Unlike animals that can remain partially alert while resting, humans require full disengagement to stabilize their internal experience. Without this disengagement, awareness turns inward and begins to erode clarity. From an evolutionary perspective, sleep became the only reliable way to pause self-observation and allow the brain to reorganize itself. This is why humans cannot remain mentally stable through prolonged wakefulness, even in comfort and safety. The human brain carries awareness as a constant load, and sleep exists to temporarily remove that load so the system can continue functioning. As this constant mental pressure builds, the human brain reaches a point where wakefulness can no longer maintain balance on its own. Unlike physical fatigue, which can sometimes be relieved by stopping movement, mental fatigue continues even in stillness. The brain has no safe way to clear accumulated activity while consciousness remains active. Awareness keeps systems engaged that cannot fully reset while the mind is awake. Attention remains partially active, emotional processing continues in the background, and memory networks stay connected. From an evolutionary perspective, this created a clear limitation. Early humans could not remain conscious indefinitely because their brains were never designed to resolve internal overload while awake. Sleep emerged as the only state in which the brain could temporarily disengage from awareness without danger. During sleep, the brain is not required to monitor the environment, evaluate meaning, or maintain a coherent sense of self. This allows internal systems to reorganize, stabilize emotional signals, and reduce accumulated noise. Other species can achieve partial recovery while awake because their mental load is lighter and more focused on immediate survival. Humans cannot rely on this strategy without losing clarity. When wakefulness is extended, the brain begins to compensate by reducing precision. Thoughts become less organized, emotional reactions grow stronger or flatter, and perception becomes less reliable. These changes are not failures, they are protective responses. The brain is signaling that it has exceeded its sustainable operating state. From the beginning of human history, sleep was the boundary that prevented deeper breakdown. Darkness, reduced activity, and safety in numbers allowed the brain to fully disengage. This was not a luxury, but a requirement built into human survival. Without regular sleep, the advantages of intelligence disappear. Planning becomes faulty, memory loses structure, and awareness turns against itself. This explains why humans require deeper and longer sleep than most species. The human brain carries a level of complexity that cannot be maintained continuously. Sleep exists to preserve that complexity by interrupting it. This interruption is essential. It allows the system to reset without losing function. In this sense, sleep is not the opposite of wakefulness, but its necessary partner. Wakefulness creates accumulation, and sleep allows release. From an evolutionary standpoint, the need for sleep marks the limit of human cognition. Intelligence expanded what humans could do, but it also defined how long they could remain conscious without harm. Sleep became the price paid to keep awareness intact. Without it, the human brain cannot remain stable, no matter how safe or comfortable the environment may be. Wakefulness in humans is often treated as a neutral state, something natural and effortless, but from a biological perspective, it is anything but calm. For the human brain, being awake is an active condition that requires constant regulation. From the moment early humans opened their eyes at dawn, the brain entered a state of monitoring, interpreting, and predicting. This was necessary for survival in open environments where danger could appear without warning. Unlike many species that rely primarily on instinct and immediate reaction, humans depended on judgment, memory, and social awareness. These functions demanded sustained attention, even when nothing was happening. The brain had to hold information ready, compare current signals with past experiences, and prepare for possible futures. This continuous readiness created internal tension that did not exist in species whose nervous systems could relax more easily. In animals, wakefulness often alternates naturally with periods of low alert rest, even while the eyes remain open. Their brains can reduce demand without fully disengaging. Humans lack this flexibility. When awake, the human brain remains fully engaged, maintaining awareness of self, environment, and social position. This engagement creates subtle stress that builds over time. It does not feel dramatic at first, because it is part of normal functioning, but biologically, it places the brain in a state that requires frequent relief. From an evolutionary viewpoint, this was manageable because wakefulness was balanced by darkness and enforced rest. Early humans did not stay awake by choice. The environment set clear limits. When the sun disappeared, activity slowed, and the brain was allowed to disengage. Wakefulness ended naturally, preventing excessive strain. The problem arises when wakefulness is extended beyond these natural boundaries. The brain continues to operate in a high-demand state without the opportunity to release tension. Over time, this leads to subtle instability. Attention becomes harder to sustain, emotional responses become less controlled, and perception grows less precise. These effects are not signs of weakness. They are indicators that wakefulness itself carries a cost. Humans evolved to tolerate this cost only within certain limits. Wakefulness was never meant to be continuous or unlimited. It was designed as a temporary state, followed by full disengagement. Other species can remain alert for long periods because their internal processing is lighter and more focused on immediate survival. Humans carry additional layers of meaning, memory, and self-reference that intensify the demands of being awake. This makes wakefulness a form of biological stress unique in its complexity. The brain must constantly stabilize itself while processing information, and this stabilization consumes resources. Without regular interruption, the system becomes strained. Sleep evolved as the counterbalance to this stress. It is the state that allows the brain to exit high-demand wakefulness safely. Understanding wakefulness as a stressful condition rather than a default state helps explain why humans need more sleep than other species. The issue is not that humans are inefficient sleepers, but that they are cognitively expensive when awake. From the beginning, human biology assumed that wakefulness would be limited. When those limits are ignored, the consequences appear not immediately, but gradually, as the brain struggles to maintain balance under sustained demand. The biological stress it creates does not remain abstract. It slowly changes how the human mind functions. Attention becomes slightly less stable, emotions take longer to settle, and small decisions feel more demanding than before. This happens because the brain is attempting to maintain clarity while operating under continuous load. Unlike physical strain, which signals itself clearly through pain or weakness, mental strain accumulates quietly. The brain compensates by adjusting how precisely it processes information. Emotional responses may become stronger or flatter, not because circumstances have changed, but because regulation requires more effort when wakefulness is prolonged. Memory also begins to shift. Recent experiences blur together, and details lose sharpness. From an evolutionary standpoint, this was never meant to be dangerous, because wakefulness was naturally limited. Early humans did not push their brains far beyond sustainable hours of alertness. Nightfall, fatigue, and environmental conditions created unavoidable pauses. These pauses allowed the nervous system to reset before instability grew too large. In modern conditions, however, wakefulness can be extended without immediate consequence. Light, safety, and social structure allow the brain to remain active long after it would normally disengage. The result is a slow drift away from balance. The brain remains awake, but its internal coordination weakens, judgment becomes less reliable, emotional reactions less proportional, and perception slightly distorted. These are not dramatic failures, they are protective adjustments. The brain is conserving resources by lowering precision. This is why people often feel mentally foggy or emotionally sensitive after long periods of wakefulness, even if they are not physically tired. Other species experience fewer of these effects because their waking minds carry less internal complexity. Their attention is directed outward toward immediate survival, not inward toward reflection and evaluation. Humans must manage both at the same time: awareness of self, memory of the past, and anticipation of the future remain active simultaneously. This creates overlapping demands that intensify stress during wakefulness. Over time, the brain reaches a threshold where continued alertness threatens coherence. When that threshold is approached, sleep pressure increases. This pressure is not simply a desire for rest. It is a biological signal that mental stability is at risk. From the beginning of human evolution, these signals ensured that wakefulness did not exceed safe limits. They guided behavior towards sleep before serious dysfunction occurred. When these signals are ignored or overridden, instability increases. Emotions may become harder to regulate, focus may drift, and the sense of reality may feel slightly altered. These effects remind us that wakefulness is not a free state. It carries a cost that must be paid down regularly. Sleep exists to restore precision, calm emotional systems, and re-establish internal order. Without it, wakefulness gradually undermines the very intelligence it supports. When wakefulness is extended further, the human brain begins to fail faster than the brains of most other species, and this difference reveals something essential about human origins. Animals can remain active for long periods because their nervous systems are built around narrow goals. They respond to hunger, danger, and opportunity with focused efficiency. Humans do not have this simplicity. Even in safety, the human brain continues to simulate possibilities, revisit memories, and evaluate meaning. As wakefulness stretches on, this constant internal activity becomes unstable. The brain attempts to maintain coherence, but the effort itself increases strain. Instead of shutting down unnecessary processes, the human brain keeps them running because awareness does not easily turn off. From an evolutionary perspective, this created a strict boundary. Early humans could not afford to remain awake indefinitely because mental breakdown would arrive before physical collapse. Confusion, poor judgment, and emotional imbalance would threaten group survival long before exhaustion of the body. Sleep, therefore, became a protective limit rather than an optional behavior. Other species can tolerate extended alertness because their internal processing is lighter and less layered. Humans carry multiple levels of thought at once, including self-awareness and social interpretation, which intensify stress under prolonged wakefulness. As this stress accumulates, the brain begins to prioritize survival over precision. Complex reasoning weakens, emotional responses become less controlled, and perception loses reliability. These changes are not sudden failures. They are gradual adaptations meant to reduce damage. However, they also reduce what makes human intelligence effective. Planning becomes shallow, learning slows, and awareness turns inward in unproductive ways. In the natural environment, these signs would push humans toward rest before deeper harm occurred. Darkness, fatigue, and reduced stimulation made sleep unavoidable. In modern settings, these limits can be bypassed, but the brain's biology has not changed. The human nervous system still responds to extended wakefulness as a threat to stability. This is why humans appear to collapse faster than other species when sleep is reduced. It is not weakness, but complexity that creates vulnerability. Intelligence expanded the range of human behavior, but it also narrowed the margin for sustained wakefulness. Sleep evolved as the safeguard that preserved mental coherence by enforcing disengagement. Without sleep, the human brain cannot sustain its own structure. Wakefulness becomes destructive when it exceeds evolutionary boundaries. Understanding this difference helps explain why humans need sleep more than other species. The cost of awareness is high, and the brain requires regular interruption to remain functional. Sleep is that interruption, and without it, the advantages of human cognition quickly turn against the organism that depends on them. It did not develop to quickly discard information once it was no longer useful. Instead, it evolved to accumulate. From the earliest stages of human history, survival depended on remembering details over long periods of time: where food was found, which paths were dangerous, which individuals could be trusted, and which past events carried meaning for the future. The human brain became a storage system, not just a reaction system. Unlike many other species that respond primarily to what is present, humans carry layers of past experience forward into every waking moment. This accumulation gave humans a powerful advantage. It allowed learning to compound rather than reset each day. It allowed culture, tools, and shared knowledge to grow across generations. But this design came with a hidden cost. Accumulation increases internal load. Each memory, association, and interpretation remains available inside the brain, even when it is not immediately needed. While awake, the brain does not simply store information passively. It continually reviews, reorders, and connects stored material to present experience. This means that wakefulness is not only about reacting to the world, but also about managing everything that has been learned before. Other species do not carry this burden to the same degree. Their learning is often task-specific and tightly linked to immediate survival. When a situation ends, the internal demand drops. For humans, the situation rarely ends. Past experiences remain active as reference points, and future possibilities are constantly imagined. This creates a growing archive inside the mind that must be maintained. From an evolutionary perspective, this was useful only because it was balanced by regular periods of disengagement. Early humans did not remain awake indefinitely with all memories active at once. Sleep provided a pause in accumulation, a state where the brain could reorganize what had been stored without adding more. Without this pause, accumulation would overwhelm stability. When wakefulness is extended, the brain continues to collect impressions, emotions, and information without sufficient opportunity to process them. Attention becomes scattered because too many references compete for relevance. Emotional reactions intensify or flatten because past associations interfere with present signals. Memory itself becomes less reliable as new input piles on top of old material. These effects are not failures of intelligence. They are natural consequences of a system built to remember. Intelligence expanded human potential by allowing information to persist across time. But persistence requires maintenance. Other species can remain alert longer because their internal storage is lighter and more selective. Humans cannot easily discard what they have learned because memory is central to identity and meaning. From the beginning, the human brain needed a way to temporarily stop accumulation in order to preserve its usefulness. Sleep evolved as that boundary. It interrupts the constant intake of new information and allows the brain to stabilize what has already been collected. Understanding intelligence as accumulation rather than efficiency helps explain why humans need more sleep than other species. The more the brain stores, the more carefully it must be managed. Without regular periods of disengagement, accumulation turns into overload. Sleep exists to prevent intelligence from collapsing under its own weight. Memory in humans is not a simple record of past events. It is an active system that constantly reshapes how the present is understood. Each experience does not remain isolated. It connects to emotions, expectations, and personal meaning. A single memory can influence decisions years later, long after the original situation has passed. This is very different from how memory functions in most other species. For animals, learning is often tied to specific outcomes. A danger is avoided, a food source is remembered, and once the situation changes, the internal demand fades. Human memory does not fade so easily. Experiences are revisited, reinterpreted, and compared with new information. This creates depth, but it also increases internal load. While awake, the human brain continuously revises its own archive. It looks for patterns, updates meaning, and adjusts identity based on accumulated knowledge. Learning, therefore, never truly stops during wakefulness. Even moments of quiet reflection add material to the system. Over time, this constant accumulation begins to compete for attention. Multiple memories are activated at once. Emotions linked to different periods of life overlap, and the brain must decide which signals matter most. This decision-making process consumes energy and stability. From an evolutionary perspective, this design was useful because it allowed humans to adapt beyond instinct. Knowledge could be layered, refined, and transmitted across generations. But it also meant that the brain carried unfinished processing forward into each new day. Early humans relied on sleep to complete what wakefulness began. During periods of rest, new information could be integrated without additional input. Without this pause, learning would become chaotic rather than cumulative. When wakefulness is extended, memories remain partially processed, emotional meaning stays unresolved, and mental associations remain active longer than intended. This leads to a feeling of mental crowding, where thoughts compete rather than flow. Attention becomes divided because too many references are active at once. Other species avoid this problem because their learning systems are narrower and more immediate. Humans accept this burden because memory is essential to culture, identity, and meaning. But the cost is clear. Accumulation without release destabilizes the system. Sleep evolved as the state where memory could be reorganized without interference. It allows connections to settle, unnecessary associations to weaken, and important patterns to become clearer. Without this process, memory does not simply grow. Understanding memory as an active, accumulating force helps explain why humans need deeper and longer sleep than other species. The more meaning the brain carries, the more carefully that meaning must be managed. Sleep is not an interruption of learning, but the condition that allows learning to remain useful. As accumulation continues, the human brain reaches a point where it can no longer maintain clarity through wakefulness alone. Information, memories, emotions, and meaning remain active at the same time, competing for relevance. While awake, the brain has no reliable way to reduce this load without losing important connections. It cannot simply erase experiences because those experiences shape identity and future decisions. Instead, it keeps them accessible, even when doing so creates internal crowding. From an evolutionary perspective, this created a structural problem. Intelligence allowed humans to store and connect knowledge across time, but wakefulness could only add to that storage, not resolve it. Early humans needed a state in which accumulation could pause and organization could occur without new input. During sleep, awareness disengages, and the brain is no longer required to respond to the environment or maintain a continuous sense of self. This temporary withdrawal allows internal systems to reorganize what has been collected. Connections can be strengthened or weakened, emotional weight can be adjusted, and unnecessary activity can fade. When wakefulness is extended, accumulation continues without resolution. The brain responds by reducing precision. Thoughts lose focus, emotional reactions become less stable, and memory becomes unreliable. This is not because the brain is failing, but because it is overloaded. Other species avoid this problem because their internal storage is limited and selective. Their learning systems do not preserve meaning in the same layered way. Humans accept this burden because accumulation is essential to intelligence, culture, and planning. But the cost is dependence. Without sleep, accumulation turns against the system that created it. The brain becomes crowded with unfinished processing, and clarity dissolves. From the beginning, human evolution relied on regular periods of unconsciousness to prevent this outcome. Sleep did not evolve as a passive break from thinking, but as an active necessity that protects intelligence from its own complexity. It allows accumulation to become structured rather than chaotic. Understanding this explains why humans cannot simply train themselves to need less sleep. Reducing sleep does not reduce accumulation. It only removes the opportunity to manage it. As long as humans remain conscious, aware, and capable of learning, accumulation will continue. Sleep exists to ensure that accumulation remains functional instead of destructive. Without it, intelligence loses coherence, and the advantages that once ensured survival begin to disappear. Sleep is often described as rest, but for the human brain it is something very different. It is a shift into an entirely different mode of operation. While awake, the brain is oriented outward, monitoring the environment, maintaining awareness, and responding to signals from the world. Even when the body is still, this outward orientation continues. The brain must remain available, ready to interpret meaning and protect the individual. It is the only state in which the brain is allowed to turn away from the external world without risk. From an evolutionary perspective, this shift was essential. In those moments, the brain no longer needed to track threats or manage social awareness. This allowed internal systems to change how they operated. Sleep does not shut the brain down. Instead, it changes priorities. External input is reduced, awareness fades, and internal processes take precedence. This is why sleep cannot be replaced by quiet wakefulness. When awake, even in silence, the brain remains responsible for maintaining a coherent sense of reality. It cannot fully reorganize itself while that responsibility remains. During sleep, that responsibility is lifted. The brain is free to focus inward without interruption. This inward focus allows processes that are impossible during wakefulness. Emotional signals can be recalibrated, memory networks can be reorganized, and accumulated activity can be reduced. Other species also experience shifts between activity and rest. But the human version is deeper because the waking state is more demanding. The more complex the waking mind, the more complete the disengagement must be. Humans cannot partially switch off awareness and still maintain mental stability. They require a full transition, This is why sleep in humans involves a loss of conscious control. It is not accidental, it is protective. Consciousness itself is suspended so that deeper maintenance can occur. From the beginning of human evolution, this transition allowed intelligence to persist without collapsing under its own weight. Sleep became the boundary between accumulation and organization. Without this division, the brain would be forced to do both at once, which it cannot do efficiently. This explains why humans need sleep that is deep and sustained. Brief pauses are not enough. The brain requires extended periods where awareness is absent and internal priorities dominate. In this sense, sleep is not the opposite of wakefulness, but its counterpart. One creates complexity, the other preserves it. Understanding sleep as a different operating mode clarifies why humans need more of it than other species. The human brain does not simply get tired, it must periodically step out of awareness to remain coherent. Sleep exists to make that step possible. When the human brain enters sleep, it begins a process that wakefulness cannot support. With awareness suspended and external demands reduced, internal systems are allowed to reorganize without interruption. During this state, emotional signals that built up during the day are gradually recalibrated. Experiences that carried strong emotional weight are softened, while others are reduced in intensity. This helps restore balance to emotional responses that may have become exaggerated or dulled during prolonged wakefulness. At the same time, memory networks are adjusted. Information gathered while awake is not simply stored as it is. Connections are strengthened, weakened, or reorganized so that meaning can be preserved without overload. This process allows important patterns to remain accessible while reducing unnecessary detail. Without sleep, these adjustments cannot occur fully because conscious attention continues to pull the brain toward immediate relevance. Sleep removes that pressure. It allows the brain to evaluate what matters without responding to the present moment. From an evolutionary perspective, this was critical. Early humans needed a way to stabilize learning without constant exposure to new stimuli. Sleep provided a protected period where internal order could be restored. In addition to memory and emotion, sleep also supports basic regulation of attention. Prolonged wakefulness narrows focus or scatters it unpredictably. During sleep, attention systems are reset, allowing clarity to return when wakefulness resumes. This reset is not a bonus, it is necessary for coherent perception. Other species require less of this process because their waking attention is simpler and more narrowly directed. Humans, however, manage layered attention that includes social awareness, personal meaning, and future planning. These layers must be realigned regularly. Sleep also allows the brain to reduce accumulated neural noise. During wakefulness, countless signals pass through neural pathways, creating minor inefficiencies. Sleep gives the system time to quiet unnecessary activity and reinforce stable patterns. This improves efficiency without requiring conscious effort. Importantly, these processes require time. Short periods of rest or quiet wakefulness are not enough. The brain needs extended disengagement to complete reorganization without interruption. This explains why humans require sustained sleep rather than brief pauses. From the beginning of human evolution, nights provided this extended window. Darkness limited activity, reduced stimulation, and encouraged group rest. The brain adapted to rely on these conditions. When sleep is shortened, these internal processes are left unfinished. Emotional regulation remains unstable, memory integration becomes fragmented, and attention fails to fully recover. Over time, this creates a sense of persistent fatigue that does not resolve with inactivity alone. Sleep is therefore not optional maintenance. It is the only environment in which the human brain can fully restore internal balance. Understanding what the brain reorganizes during sleep clarifies why humans cannot simply remain awake and expect stability. Wakefulness creates complexity, and sleep makes that complexity manageable. Without sufficient sleep, the systems that support intelligence remain partially disordered, and the advantages of awareness are slowly undermined. Sleep exists to preserve coherence by allowing the brain to complete work that consciousness prevents. For the human brain, partial disengagement is not enough. The processes that stabilize emotion, memory, and attention require a level of withdrawal from awareness that cannot occur while consciousness remains active. Even light awareness keeps the brain oriented toward the external world, maintaining a sense of self, monitoring surroundings, and preparing responses. This orientation interferes with deep reorganization. From an evolutionary perspective, this is why human sleep involves a full loss of conscious control rather than a light resting state. Early humans could only afford this loss when conditions were safe, such as darkness, shelter, and proximity to others. In those moments, the brain no longer needed to stay vigilant. This allowed internal systems to operate without interruption. Other species can recover with lighter forms of rest because their waking minds are simpler and less layered. They do not carry the same continuous self-awareness or long-term narrative that humans maintain while awake. As a result, they can reduce neural demand without fully disconnecting from the environment. Humans cannot. When awareness remains even partially active, memory continues to reference the past. Emotions continue to respond to imagined outcomes, and attention remains divided. These ongoing demands prevent the brain from completing its internal work. Full unconsciousness removes these demands entirely. It suspends the need to interpret meaning, defend identity, and monitor the world. Only then can internal priorities take control. During this state, the brain is free to recalibrate without negotiating with conscious goals. Emotional intensity can be adjusted without resistance. Memory connections can be refined without immediate relevance, and attention systems can reset without interruption. This depth of disengagement is not accidental. It reflects the level of complexity that wakefulness imposes on the human brain. The more complex the waking state, the more complete the disengagement must be. This is why humans experience sleep as a distinct boundary rather than a gradual fading. Consciousness does not slowly step aside, it is switched off. From the beginning, this mechanism protected mental stability. Without it, intelligence would erode under continuous self-reference. When humans attempt to reduce sleep or rely on lighter rest, these internal processes remain incomplete. Emotional regulation stays unstable, memories remain partially processed, and attention does not fully recover. Over time, the brain compensates by lowering precision, which weakens judgment and clarity. These effects reveal that human sleep is not interchangeable with rest. It is a specialized state designed to match the demands of human awareness. Other species can afford lighter recovery because their internal systems are less burdened. Humans cannot, because awareness itself is heavy. Sleep evolved as the only state capable of carrying that weight safely. Understanding this explains why humans require deep, sustained sleep rather than brief or fragmented rest. The brain must be allowed to disappear from awareness entirely in order to preserve awareness itself. This paradox sits at the center of human sleep. Consciousness survives only by being regularly suspended, and the more complex it becomes, the more necessary that suspension is. Compared to humans, many other species appear to function with remarkably little sleep, and this difference begins with how their nervous systems evolved. Most animals are designed around immediate survival. Their brains prioritize sensing the environment, reacting quickly, and conserving energy whenever possible. When there is no threat and no need to act, their internal activity drops naturally. Even while awake, their brains can enter low-demand states without losing stability. This allows them to rest without fully disengaging from the world. Humans did not evolve this way. Early humans survived by interpreting complex environments, remembering social relationships, and anticipating events that had not yet happened. These abilities required a nervous system that remained internally active, even in safety. Other species rely more heavily on instinct and repetition. Once a situation is resolved, their internal processing quiets. Humans carry unresolved information forward. Social interactions, emotional meaning, and learned knowledge remain active long after the moment has passed. This creates a continuous internal load that other species simply do not carry. From an evolutionary standpoint, animals that sleep lightly or in fragments can afford to do so because their waking state is simpler. Their attention is directed outward toward immediate cues, not inward towards self-evaluation or long-term planning. Humans must manage both at once. Even when resting, the human brain continues to reference the past and project into the future. This makes partial recovery insufficient. Other species can divide sleep into short periods because their internal systems reset quickly. Humans require longer, deeper sleep because their systems accumulate more complexity. The structure of animal sleep reflects this difference. Many species can sleep with parts of their brain active, maintaining awareness of danger. Humans cannot rely on this strategy without sacrificing mental coherence. Partial awareness keeps internal narratives running, which prevents full recovery. Evolution shaped animals to remain alert with minimal internal conflict. Humans evolved to trade that efficiency for intelligence. This trade created vulnerability. The more meaning and memory the brain carries, the harder it is to stabilize while awake. Other species avoid overload by limiting what they store and process. Humans expand storage and processing because it supports learning, culture, and cooperation. The cost of this expansion is dependence on deep sleep. Early humans lived in conditions that supported this dependence. Darkness reduced activity, predators encouraged group rest, and natural rhythms enforced sleep. Other species adapted differently, developing nervous systems that could rest without fully shutting down. Humans did not need this adaptation because sleep was reliable. The difference is not superiority or weakness, but specialization. Each species evolved to meet its own challenges. Humans evolved to think deeply, not to remain awake indefinitely. When comparing sleep needs across species, the key factor is not endurance but internal complexity. Animals with simpler internal demands can afford lighter sleep. Humans cannot because their brains carry more unfinished processing at any given moment. This is why humans need sleep that is not only longer but deeper. The nervous system requires a complete pause from awareness to reset itself. Other species can recover while partially alert because their internal demands are lower. Humans require full disengagement because their waking minds are heavier. Understanding this difference helps explain why sleep is more critical for humans than for most other species. It is not that humans sleep poorly, but that they evolved with a brain that cannot safely remain awake without regular, deep interruption. Many animals use sleep strategies that appear very different from human sleep, and these strategies help explain why they can function with less total rest. In a wide range of species, sleep is fragmented rather than continuous. Short periods of rest are spread throughout the day or night, allowing recovery without complete disengagement. Some animals are able to rest parts of their brain while other parts remain active, maintaining basic awareness of the environment. This allows them to respond quickly to danger even while resting. These strategies are effective because the internal demands of their brains are limited. Their nervous systems are primarily focused on immediate signals such as movement, sound, and threat. When those signals are absent, internal activity drops naturally. Humans do not share this advantage. Even when external danger is low, the human brain continues to process internal information. Thoughts, memories, emotions, and social meaning remain active. Because of this, fragmented sleep does not provide the same level of recovery for humans as it does for other species. Partial awareness keeps internal processes running, which interferes with deeper stabilization. From a biological perspective, this difference is not mysterious. It reflects how each nervous system evolved to solve different problems. Animals that rely on instinct and repetition benefit from remaining partially alert. Their survival depends on fast reaction rather than complex interpretation. Humans depend on understanding context, remembering relationships, and anticipating future outcomes. These functions require integrated brain activity that cannot easily be paused in pieces. When humans attempt to rest without fully disengaging, internal processing continues beneath the surface. This means that emotional regulation, memory integration, and attention recovery remain incomplete. Over time, this leads to cumulative fatigue rather than relief. Research on sleep across species consistently shows that the depth and continuity of sleep are closely related to cognitive complexity. Species with simpler behavioral repertoires tend to sleep more lightly and in shorter segments. Species with more complex learning and social structures tend to require deeper, more consolidated sleep. Humans sit at the far end of this spectrum. Their brains integrate large amounts of information across time, which increases the need for uninterrupted recovery. This does not mean that human sleep is inefficient. It means that it is specialized. Fragmented sleep strategies work when internal load is low. They fail when internal load is high. Humans carry high internal load because awareness, memory, and meaning are always active during wakefulness. Attempts to adopt animal-like sleep patterns ignore this fundamental difference. When humans reduce sleep depth or break sleep into short segments, they may remain awake, but internal organization suffers. Attention becomes unstable, emotional balance weakens, and learning loses clarity. These effects often appear gradually, making them easy to dismiss. However, they reflect a real biological mismatch. The human nervous system was not designed to recover in fragments. It evolved in environments where long periods of darkness and safety allowed full disengagement. Other species evolved under different pressures, where constant vigilance was necessary. Their sleep strategies reflect that reality. Humans do not gain an advantage by copying them. Instead, doing so undermines the systems that support human intelligence. Understanding this distinction is important because it reframes sleep need as a structural feature rather than a personal limitation. Humans are not failing when they require deep, continuous sleep. They are responding appropriately to the demands of a complex brain. Other species recover differently because their internal demands are different. Sleep strategies are not interchangeable across evolution. Each reflects a balance between awareness and survival, shaped over thousands of generations. For humans, that balance requires full disengagement. This is why lighter or fragmented rest cannot replace deep sleep, and why humans need more sleep than most other species to remain mentally stable. When humans attempt to adopt sleep patterns that resemble those of other species, the results reveal the limits of human biology. Reducing sleep into short segments or relying on light rest may allow the body to remain awake, but it does not provide the internal recovery that the human brain requires. Awareness continues beneath the surface, carrying unresolved thoughts, emotional meaning, and memory associations forward without interruption. Over time, this creates a growing mismatch between wakefulness and stability. The brain remains active, but its internal organization weakens. Attention becomes less consistent, emotional responses lose proportionality, and learning becomes less efficient. These changes do not appear suddenly. They develop gradually, making them easy to misinterpret as normal stress or aging. From a biological perspective, they reflect incomplete recovery. Other species avoid this outcome because their sleep strategies evolved alongside simpler internal demands. Humans evolved differently. Their brains integrate information across long time spans. This integration requires uninterrupted periods where new input is blocked and internal systems can reorganize fully. Fragmented sleep prevents this process from completing. Emotional signals remain partially active, memory networks stay crowded, and attention systems fail to reset. Over time, the brain compensates by lowering precision. This allows basic functioning to continue, but it reduces clarity and resilience. Early humans rarely faced this situation because environmental conditions enforce sleep continuity. Darkness, limited activity, and group safety created natural boundaries for wakefulness. In modern conditions, these boundaries can be bypassed, but the underlying biology remains unchanged. Attempting to override it does not make humans more adaptable. It exposes vulnerability. This is why humans appear to suffer more quickly from reduced or disrupted sleep than many animals. The issue is not endurance, but internal complexity. When the human brain is denied the depth of sleep it requires, it begins to trade quality for continuity. Wakefulness continues, but stability erodes. This erosion affects judgment, emotional balance, and the ability to assign meaning accurately. These functions are central to human intelligence. Losing them gradually undermines what makes humans effective and adaptable. Understanding this helps clarify why sleep needs cannot be trained away or optimized out of existence. They are structural requirements shaped by evolution. Humans do not gain advantage by sleeping like other species because they are not built like other species. Sleep strategies evolved to match internal demands, not personal ambition or cultural preference. For humans, deep and continuous sleep protects mental coherence by allowing full disengagement from awareness. Without it, the brain operates in a compromised state, accumulating strain rather than releasing it. This explains why human sleep is not flexible in the way animal sleep can be. It is specialized for a brain that carries meaning, memory, and self-awareness simultaneously. When that specialization is ignored, the cost is not immediate collapse, but gradual loss of clarity and balance. Recognizing this difference reframes sleep as a necessary condition for maintaining human intelligence, not a weakness to overcome. Humans need sleep more than other species because their brains are doing more while awake, and that extra work requires a deeper reset. Long-term memory is one of the most defining features of the human brain, and it plays a central role in why humans need more sleep than other species. Humans do not simply react to the present. They carry detailed records of past experiences forward into every moment of awareness. These records are not stored as isolated facts. They are linked to emotion, personal meaning, and expectations about the future. From an evolutionary perspective, this ability gave early humans a powerful advantage, remembering where danger occurred, which social bonds were reliable, and which choices led to success, allowed learning to accumulate over time. It compounded. However, this compounding created a unique biological burden. Long-term memory keeps the past active even when it is no longer relevant to the present moment. While awake, the human brain continuously references previous experiences to interpret current situations. This process happens automatically and cannot be easily paused. Even in calm conditions, memories influence perception, emotional tone, and decision-making. Other species do not experience this to the same degree. Their memory systems are more closely tied to immediate survival tasks and fade when situations change. Humans, by contrast, maintain memory as part of identity. Experiences become part of who a person is, not just what they have encountered. This makes memory persistent and deeply integrated into awareness. As a result, wakefulness involves managing not only current input but also a vast internal archive. Each new experience is compared against what is already stored, adding further layers of meaning. Over time, this creates internal density. The brain must constantly decide which memories matter most, which emotions to prioritize, and which associations to suppress. This ongoing evaluation requires energy and stability. From the beginning of human evolution, sleep provided a necessary pause in this process. During sleep, the brain could work with stored information without adding new material. This allowed memory to be reorganized rather than simply expanded. Without this pause, long-term memory would overwhelm attention and emotional regulation. Extended wakefulness reveals this vulnerability. When sleep is reduced, memories intrude more easily, emotional associations become stronger or less controlled, and the boundary between past and present weakens. These effects are not psychological flaws, they are biological signals that memory systems are overloaded. Other species can remain awake longer because their memories do not carry the same personal and temporal weight. Humans accept this burden because long-term memory supports culture, cooperation, and planning across generations. But that acceptance comes with a cost. The more memory is preserved, the more carefully it must be maintained. Sleep exists to protect memory from becoming chaotic. It allows the brain to stabilize what has been learned and reduce unnecessary activation. Without sufficient sleep, long-term memory does not disappear. It becomes intrusive. Thoughts circle, familiar themes, emotional responses intensify, and mental clarity declines. Understanding long-term memory as a constant internal presence helps explain why humans cannot simply remain awake without consequence. Wakefulness keeps memory active, and activity accumulates. Sleep provides the only reliable opportunity to restore balance. Humans need more sleep than other species because they carry more of their past into the present, and that continuity requires regular maintenance to remain functional. Imagination is another defining feature of the human brain, and it adds a further layer to why humans need more sleep than other species. Unlike simple memory, imagination allows the mind to move beyond what has already happened. It projects possibilities into the future, simulates outcomes, and prepares for events that may never occur. From an evolutionary perspective, this ability helped early humans survive in uncertain environments. Imagining future danger, planning routes, or anticipating social consequences increased the chances of success. However, this capacity also created continuous mental activity that does not depend on external stimulation. Even in quiet and safe conditions, the human brain continues to imagine. It revisits conversations, predicts future interactions, and evaluates potential outcomes. Other species show limited forms of anticipation, usually tied directly to immediate needs such as food or threat. When those needs are absent, internal activity decreases. Humans do not experience this reduction in the same way. Imagination keeps the mind active even when the environment is calm. From a biological standpoint, this means that wakefulness carries an added internal demand. The brain is not only processing what is happening, but also what might happen. Each imagined scenario activates emotional and cognitive systems as if the event were real. Over time, this repeated activation contributes to mental load. The brain must regulate emotional responses to events that exist only in thought. This regulation consumes energy and stability. In early human environments, imagination was naturally limited by conditions. Darkness, fatigue, and lack of stimulation reduced opportunities for extended mental simulation. Sleep followed before imagination could spiral indefinitely. In modern conditions, however, imagination can continue unchecked for long periods. The brain remains awake and active, projecting futures without interruption. This increases the need for sleep as a counterbalance. During sleep, imagination is suspended. The brain is no longer required to evaluate hypothetical outcomes or manage emotional responses to imagined events. This suspension allows internal systems to recover from constant projection. Without sufficient sleep, imagination becomes intrusive rather than useful. Thoughts repeat, worries intensify, and mental clarity decreases. These effects are not signs of poor discipline or weak will. They reflect the biological cost of a brain designed to imagine beyond the present moment. Other species avoid this cost because their nervous systems are less oriented toward future simulation. Humans accept it because imagination supports planning, creativity, and cooperation. But this acceptance requires regular periods of disengagement. Sleep provides the only reliable pause from imagination. It stops the flow of projected futures and allows emotional systems to settle. Without this pause, the brain remains trapped in continuous anticipation. Over time, this undermines focus, emotional balance, and decision-making. Understanding imagination as a constant internal process helps explain why humans need deeper and longer sleep. Wakefulness fuels imagination, and imagination increases mental demand. Sleep interrupts this cycle, preventing overload. Humans need more sleep than other species because their minds are not confined to the present. They live partly in memory and partly in imagined futures, and maintaining that mental range requires regular and complete disengagement. When long-term memory and imagination operate together, they create a level of internal activity that is unique to the human brain. Memory keeps the past present, while imagination projects that past forward into possible futures. Past experiences shape imagined outcomes, and imagined outcomes reactivate emotional traces from memory. This interaction does not pause simply because the external world is quiet. While awake, the human brain continuously moves between what has happened and what might happen next. From an evolutionary perspective, this interaction increased survival by allowing early humans to learn from experience and prepare for uncertainty. However, it also created a sustained internal workload that other species do not carry. Animals may remember specific threats or rewards, but they do not typically weave those memories into complex future scenarios in the same persistent way. Humans do. This weaving process gives meaning to experience, but it also increases biological cost. Each imagined future draws on memory, emotion, and evaluation. Each memory, in turn, gains new emotional weight through imagination. Over time, this creates dense networks of internal activity that must be regulated. While awake, the brain attempts to manage these networks while also responding to the present moment. This dual demand strains stability. Attention becomes divided between external input and internal simulation. Emotional systems respond not only to what is happening, but to what is remembered and anticipated. From the beginning of human evolution, this complexity was sustainable only because it was regularly interrupted. Sleep provided a state where memory and imagination could disengage from conscious control. During sleep, the brain is no longer required to maintain a continuous narrative linking past and future. This break allows emotional intensity to decrease and associations to loosen. Without conscious imagination driving interpretation, memories can be reorganized without being repeatedly reactivated. This process helps prevent internal systems from becoming overly rigid or emotionally charged. When sleep is reduced, the interaction between memory and imagination remains active for too long. Thoughts loop familiar themes, concerns feel amplified, and the boundary between reflection and rumination weakens. These effects are not psychological habits. They are biological consequences of continuous internal simulation. Other species avoid this burden because their cognitive systems do not sustain extended internal narratives. Humans accept it because narrative thinking supports identity, planning, and cooperation. But this acceptance comes with dependence. The more the brain connects past and future, the more it requires periods where those connections can rest. Sleep exists to provide that rest. It interrupts the cycle of remembering and projecting allowing the brain to reset emotional tone and cognitive flexibility. Without sufficient sleep, memory and imagination no longer support intelligence effectively. They begin to reinforce each other in unproductive ways, increasing stress and reducing clarity. Understanding this interaction helps explain why humans cannot simply shorten sleep without consequence. Reducing sleep does not reduce memory or imagination. It removes the only reliable pause they have. Humans need more sleep than other species because their minds operate across time, not just in the present. Maintaining that temporal range requires regular disengagement. Sleep is the mechanism that makes this possible. It protects intelligence by limiting its continuous operation. Without sleep, the systems that allow humans to reflect, plan, and understand would gradually undermine themselves. Human biology is shaped by rhythms that formed long before modern society existed, and these rhythms play a crucial role in why humans need more sleep than other species. From an evolutionary perspective, early humans lived in environments governed by predictable cycles of light and darkness. Daylight signaled activity, movement, and social interaction, while darkness brought reduced visibility, increased risk, and limited options for action. Over thousands of generations, the human nervous system adapted to these conditions. Wakefulness aligned with daylight, and sleep followed the disappearance of light. This pattern was not a cultural choice but a biological adaptation. The brain learned to expect periods of full disengagement at regular intervals. These intervals allowed internal systems to recover from the demands of awareness, memory, and imagination. Unlike some species that evolved in environments requiring constant vigilance, humans relied on cooperation and shelter to remain safe at night. This allowed deeper and more continuous sleep to become part of human survival strategy. Other species developed different rhythms based on their ecological needs. Some needed to remain alert around the clock, others slept in short bursts, and some adapted to extreme conditions with irregular cycles. Humans did not. Their biology became closely tied to a stable day-night rhythm. This rhythm regulated not only sleep and wakefulness, but also hormone release, body temperature, attention, and emotional balance. When these systems operate in sync, mental stability is easier to maintain. When they fall out of sync, strain increases. From the beginning, sleep acted as the anchor that kept these rhythms aligned. It marked a clear transition between active engagement with the world and internal restoration. Humans evolved to depend on this transition. They did not develop strong mechanisms to remain mentally stable without it. Even when external danger was low, the brain expected darkness to signal disengagement. This expectation shaped how alertness rose and fell across the day. Other species often show more flexible timing, because their survival depends on responding whenever conditions demand it. Humans relied on predictability instead. Their strength came from planning, cooperation, and memory, all of which function best when internal rhythms are stable. When natural rhythms are disrupted, the brain struggles to compensate. Extended wakefulness at times when the body expects rest increases internal stress. Attention becomes less reliable. Emotional regulation weakens. These effects are not signs of weakness, but indicators that biological timing is being ignored. Early humans rarely faced this problem because their environment enforced rhythm. Darkness limited activity, and artificial stimulation did not exist. Sleep occurred not because of discipline, but because conditions made wakefulness impractical. The brain adapted accordingly. This adaptation remains present today. Human sleep need reflects ancient timing systems that still govern mental stability. Other species may bypass strict rhythms because their nervous systems evolved for constant alertness or simpler internal processing. Humans cannot do this easily because their cognitive systems depend on regular synchronization. Sleep provides that synchronization by aligning internal processes with the evolutionary rhythm of day and night. Understanding this helps explain why humans cannot freely adjust sleep without consequence. Their biology expects rest at certain intervals, and when those expectations are unmet, strain accumulates. Humans need more sleep than other species because their brains evolved in close partnership with stable rhythms rather than continuous vigilance. Sleep is the mechanism that keeps those rhythms intact, allowing awareness to function without losing coherence. Within these ancient rhythms, the human body developed internal timing systems that regulate when alertness rises and when recovery becomes necessary. These systems coordinate sleep pressure, attention, hormone release, and emotional stability across the day and night. From an evolutionary perspective, they allowed early humans to function efficiently during daylight and disengage safely after dark. This coordination reduced internal conflict. When the brain expected rest, the body supported it. When the brain expected activity, energy and focus increased naturally. Other species evolved different timing strategies depending on their environments. Some needed to respond at any hour, others followed irregular cycles, and many relied on short periods of rest spread throughout the day. Their internal clocks became tightly linked to a predictable rhythm. This made planning, social cooperation, and learning more reliable, but it also increased dependence on proper timing. When internal rhythms align, wakefulness feels sustainable. When they drift apart, strain appears. Extended wakefulness at biologically inappropriate times forces the brain to work against its own timing signals. Alertness must be artificially maintained while recovery signals continue to rise. This conflict consumes resources. Attention becomes fragile. Emotional responses become less regulated, and the sense of mental clarity weakens. However, they reflect real biological tension. Early humans avoided this tension because their environment reinforced timing. Darkness reduced stimulation, activity slowed, and sleep followed naturally. Over generations, internal systems adapted to expect reliable periods of disengagement. This expectation shaped how sleep pressure builds and how deeply sleep must occur. Humans did not evolve strong mechanisms to suppress sleep need indefinitely because they did not need them. Their survival did not depend on constant alertness, but on cooperation and rhythm. Other species that evolved under constant threat developed more flexible timing systems. Humans invested in predictability instead. This investment created vulnerability when rhythms are disrupted. When sleep is delayed or shortened repeatedly, internal systems lose synchronization, recovery processes remain incomplete, and wakefulness becomes increasingly costly. The brain responds by lowering efficiency, not because it is failing, but because it is protecting stability. These adjustments appear as reduced focus, emotional sensitivity, and mental fatigue. They signal that timing expectations are not being met. Understanding this reveals why humans cannot simply choose new sleep schedules without consequence. Internal timing systems are not habits. They are biological adaptations shaped over thousands of years. Other species may tolerate irregular rhythms because their nervous systems evolved to do so. Humans cannot easily adapt because their cognitive complexity depends on stable timing. Sleep acts as the central signal that resets these internal clocks. Without it, systems drift further apart. This explains why humans need sleep that is not only sufficient in duration, but also properly timed. Sleep restores alignment between internal processes that evolved to work together. When alignment is lost, awareness becomes strained. Humans need more sleep than other species because their brains rely on precise timing to manage complexity. Sleep preserves that timing, allowing intelligence to operate within safe biological limits. Humans did not evolve strong biological mechanisms to tolerate prolonged disruption of their internal rhythms, and this limitation helps explain why they need more sleep than many other species. From an evolutionary perspective, there was little advantage for early humans to remain awake at biologically inappropriate times. Night brought reduced visibility, higher risk, and limited opportunity for productive activity. Survival depended more on conserving energy and maintaining group cohesion than on continuous vigilance. As a result, human biology invested in predictable cycles rather than flexibility. Other species faced different pressures. Animals exposed to constant predation or environmental instability benefited from nervous systems that could shift alertness quickly and tolerate irregular rest. Humans relied on cooperation, shelter, and shared schedules to reduce risk. This allowed deep, regular sleep to become part of the survival strategy. Over time, the human brain adapted to expect reliable periods of disengagement. Internal systems learned to coordinate around those expectations. Hormonal signals, attention patterns, and emotional regulation all became synchronized with predictable sleep timing. This coordination supported complex cognition, social learning, and long-term planning. However, it also reduced tolerance for disruption. When sleep is delayed or fragmented, these systems do not easily adjust. Instead of shifting smoothly, they compete. Signals that promote alertness clash with signals that demand recovery. The brain must work harder to maintain basic stability. Other species often avoid this conflict because their internal processing is simpler or more modular. They can switch states without destabilizing the whole system. Humans cannot do this as easily because their cognitive functions are deeply interconnected. Memory, emotion, attention, and self-awareness depend on shared timing cues. When those cues are disrupted, instability spreads across systems. From the beginning of human evolution, this vulnerability was acceptable because rhythm disruption was rare. The natural environment enforced regular cycles. Artificial light, extended social schedules, and constant stimulation did not exist. Humans did not need to evolve strong resilience to timing disruption because their environment did not demand it. That evolutionary choice remains embedded in human biology. Today, when rhythms are repeatedly overridden, the brain responds by lowering performance rather than adapting fully. This response protects long-term stability, but makes sustained wakefulness increasingly difficult. Attention weakens, emotional balance becomes harder to maintain, and mental clarity declines. These effects are not failures of will or discipline. They reflect biological design. Humans are not built to function indefinitely outside their evolutionary timing. Sleep acts as the anchor that restores alignment. Without it, internal systems drift further apart, increasing strain. Other species may appear more adaptable because their survival required it. Humans traded adaptability for depth. Their intelligence depends on stable internal coordination, not constant alertness. This trade explains why humans struggle more with disrupted rhythms than many animals. It also explains why sleep cannot be easily compressed or replaced. The brain expects a certain pattern, and when that pattern is broken repeatedly, recovery becomes more demanding. Humans need more sleep than other species because their biology was shaped around predictability rather than flexibility. Sleep preserves that predictability by realigning internal systems with their original rhythm. When this alignment is restored, wakefulness becomes manageable again. When it is not, awareness becomes costly. Understanding this limitation reframes sleep need as a consequence of human evolutionary choices rather than a modern inconvenience. Humans did not evolve to defeat time. They evolved to live within it. Sleep is the mechanism that allows their complex minds to do so without losing stability. Modern time operates according to rules that human biology did not evolve to follow, and this conflict intensifies the human need for sleep. For most of human history, time was experienced through natural signals. Light and darkness determined activity, seasons shaped effort, and the pace of life adjusted automatically to environmental limits. The human brain adapted to this structure. Alertness rose with daylight, social interaction clustered around visible hours, and rest followed naturally when stimulation faded. These patterns supported the internal rhythms that kept cognition stable. Modern time breaks this structure. Artificial light extends visibility far beyond sunset. Social schedules ignore natural boundaries, and constant access to information removes clear transitions between activity and rest. From a biological perspective, this creates confusion. The brain receives mixed signals. External cues suggest continued engagement, while internal systems still expect disengagement. This mismatch forces the brain to maintain wakefulness at times when recovery signals are rising. The result is increased internal cost. Attention becomes harder to sustain. Emotional regulation weakens, and mental fatigue accumulates more quickly. Early humans rarely faced this conflict because the environment enforced limits. Darkness reduced activity, danger encouraged rest, and there was little incentive to remain awake without purpose. Sleep occurred because wakefulness was no longer useful. Modern environments remove that constraint. Wakefulness can continue indefinitely, even when it is biologically inefficient. However, the human brain has not changed to match this flexibility. Its internal systems still rely on predictable cycles to manage complexity. When those cycles are disrupted repeatedly, recovery becomes more demanding. Sleep must work harder to restore balance that was once maintained naturally. Other species often adapt more easily to irregular schedules because their internal processing is simpler or more directly tied to immediate cues. Humans cannot rely on the same strategy. Their brains integrate memory, imagination, and social meaning across time. This integration depends on stable transitions between engagement and disengagement. When modern time blurs those transitions, internal strain increases. The brain compensates by increasing sleep pressure. This pressure is not a flaw but a response. It reflects the effort required to realign systems that are being pulled out of rhythm. From an evolutionary standpoint, this response protects mental stability. Without it, wakefulness would erode clarity faster. Modern time does not remove the need for sleep, it amplifies it. The more wakefulness is extended beyond natural limits, the more recovery is required to restore coherence. This is why many people feel persistently tired, even when physically inactive. The brain is working against timing signals that evolved for a different world. Sleep becomes the primary opportunity to repair this conflict. It allows internal systems to reconnect with their original rhythm. Even briefly, without sufficient sleep, the mismatch persists and strain accumulates. Understanding this helps explain why sleep problems increase in modern settings. The issue is not that humans have become weaker, but that time itself has changed faster than biology. The human brain still expects clear boundaries, but modern life removes them. Sleep acts as the remaining boundary. It is the last reliable signal that tells the brain when to disengage and reorganize. This makes sleep more important now, not less. Humans need sleep not only because of who they are, but because of how time is structured around them. Modern time demands extended wakefulness, but human biology demands recovery. Sleep exists at the intersection of this conflict, preserving mental stability in a world that no longer pauses on its own. Social signals and artificial light have become some of the strongest forces shaping human wakefulness, and they place additional strain on systems that evolved for a very different environment. From a biological perspective, light is the primary signal that tells the brain when to be alert and when to prepare for rest. For most of human history, this signal was simple and reliable. Brightness increased during the day and faded at night, allowing internal timing systems to adjust smoothly. Social activity followed the same pattern, clustering around daylight hours and slowing naturally after dark. Modern conditions disrupt both signals at once. Artificial light keeps environments bright long after sunset, and social expectations encourage continued engagement regardless of biological readiness. The brain receives cues to stay alert even as internal systems begin to signal the need for recovery. This conflict does not shut the brain down, but it increases internal effort. Attention must be actively maintained, emotional regulation requires more control, and mental clarity becomes harder to preserve. Over time, this effort accumulates as fatigue. The brain is not failing, it is compensating. Early humans did not need strong resistance to these pressures because they did not exist. There was little advantage to staying awake in darkness, and few activities justified the risk. Modern environments remove these constraints. Work, communication, and entertainment continue without interruption. Social connection no longer depends on shared daylight, and artificial light prevents the natural decline in stimulation. As a result, wakefulness extends into periods when the brain expects disengagement. This extension does not eliminate sleep need. It delays it. When sleep finally occurs, it must compensate for prolonged imbalance. The brain attempts to complete recovery in less time, increasing pressure for deeper sleep. This is why reduced or delayed sleep often feels less restorative. Recovery processes are compressed, not because sleep is inefficient, but because it is being asked to do more. Other species are less affected by artificial signals because their behavior remains closely tied to environmental cues. Humans are uniquely sensitive to social time. Conversation, obligation, and shared schedules carry emotional meaning that keeps the brain engaged even when physical conditions suggest rest. This engagement activates memory and imagination, further increasing internal load. The combination of light and social stimulation creates a powerful extension of wakefulness that biology did not anticipate. Over repeated cycles, internal timing systems lose clarity. Signals that once rose and fell predictably begin to overlap. Alertness lingers when it should decline, and recovery signals rise while activity continues. This overlap increases biological cost. The brain must operate in a state of compromise, never fully alert and never fully recovered. Sleep becomes the only opportunity to resolve this conflict. It is the time when artificial signals are reduced and internal systems can reassert their original rhythm. Without sufficient sleep, misalignment persists. Attention remains unstable, emotions require more effort to regulate, and mental fatigue becomes chronic. These effects are often attributed to lifestyle choices, but they reflect a deeper mismatch between modern signals and ancient biology. Understanding this helps clarify why sleep is increasingly important rather than optional. Modern environments push wakefulness beyond natural limits, and sleep must absorb the consequences. The more social time and artificial light extend the day, the more recovery is required at night. Humans need sleep not because they lack discipline, but because their brains are responding appropriately to conflicting signals. Sleep allows internal systems to reset when external cues no longer provide clear guidance. In a world where night no longer enforces rest, sleep remains the last mechanism that can restore alignment. It is not weakened by modern time, it is burdened by it. This burden explains why humans feel the need for deeper and more consistent sleep in environments that never truly grow dark. The human brain cannot fully adapt to modern signals because those signals change faster than biology can. Adjust, artificial light, constant social engagement, and extended schedules create patterns of wakefulness that did not exist during human evolution. While the brain is capable of short-term adjustment, it lacks mechanisms for permanent adaptation to continuous rhythm disruption. Internal timing systems evolved to rely on stable cues, not flexible ones. When those cues are replaced with inconsistent or contradictory signals, the brain responds by increasing effort rather than redesigning itself. This effort appears as heightened sleep pressure, mental fatigue, and reduced resilience. Recovery processes are repeatedly delayed or compressed, leaving internal systems partially restored. Attention becomes less reliable. Emotional balance requires more conscious control, and memory integration becomes less efficient. These changes are gradual, which makes them difficult to recognize as biological strain. They are often mistaken for normal stress or aging. From an evolutionary perspective, this inability to adapt fully is not a failure. It reflects a design optimized for predictability. Humans evolved to function within clear boundaries between activity and rest. Modern signals remove those boundaries without removing the underlying need for recovery. Other species may tolerate irregular cues because their internal processing is simpler or more modular. Humans cannot compartmentalize in the same way. Memory, emotion, imagination, and self-awareness share timing systems. When timing is disrupted, strain spreads across functions. This is why repeated rhythm disruption does not lead to stable adaptation, but to cumulative fatigue. The brain responds by lowering performance to protect coherence. Sleep becomes deeper or more urgent, not because the brain is weak, but because it is compensating for ongoing misalignment. Attempts to override this response through habit or discipline do not eliminate the need for sleep. Over long periods, this cost appears as persistent tiredness, reduced clarity, and emotional sensitivity. These outcomes are consistent with what is known about biological timing systems under chronic disruption. Sleep remains the only state where modern signals are reliably reduced and internal rhythms can reassert themselves. It is the brain's primary tool for correcting misalignment that cannot be solved while awake. Without sufficient sleep, the conflict between modern time and ancient biology remains unresolved. Understanding this helps explain why sleep difficulties are more common in environments with constant stimulation. The issue is not individual failure but structural mismatch. Human biology did not evolve to operate without clear pauses. Modern life removes pauses, and sleep must replace them. This makes sleep more necessary, not less. Humans need sleep more than other species, because their brains are both complex and rhythm-dependent. When rhythms are disrupted repeatedly, sleep becomes the last remaining mechanism for restoring order. It cannot be replaced by adaptation alone. Biology changes slowly, and until it does, sleep remains essential for maintaining stability in a world that no longer rests. Sleep emerges as the last boundary protecting human mental stability. When all other limits are removed, sleep becomes the only mechanism that the brain cannot bypass without consequence. From an evolutionary perspective, this boundary developed to prevent awareness from exceeding what the nervous system can safely manage. Early humans did not need many artificial limits because the environment enforced them naturally. Darkness, fatigue, and reduced activity created unavoidable pauses. In modern conditions, those pauses are optional, but the brain's tolerance has not expanded to match that freedom. Sleep now carries the responsibility that the environment once held. It marks the point where accumulation, stimulation, and internal strain must stop. Without this boundary, the brain continues to operate under rising cost. Attention fragments, emotional regulation weakens, and the sense of coherence slowly erodes. These changes are not dramatic failures, but gradual shifts that signal overload. Other species rely less on sleep as a boundary, because their internal processing is narrower and more directly tied to immediate cues. Humans rely on sleep because their minds operate across memory, imagination, and meaning simultaneously. This complexity requires enforced disengagement. Sleep provides that enforcement by removing conscious control entirely. It does not negotiate with intention or discipline. When sleep arrives, awareness recedes regardless of preference. This protects the brain from pushing itself beyond sustainable limits. Attempts to delay or reduce sleep do not remove the boundary. They only increase pressure against it. Over time, the brain responds by intensifying sleep need. This is not a malfunction, but a protective adjustment. From the beginning, sleep served as the point where internal systems could no longer be asked to perform. It was the signal that accumulation must pause. In modern life, this function becomes even more critical. With constant stimulation and extended schedules, there are few natural signals telling the brain to stop. Sleep remains the only one that cannot be ignored indefinitely. It restores basic alignment by forcing disengagement when voluntary restraint fails. Understanding sleep as a boundary reframes its role. It is not an interruption to productivity or awareness, but a safeguard that prevents awareness from turning against itself. Humans need sleep more than other species because their brains are capable of exceeding safe limits without realizing it. Sleep exists to stop that progression. It defines how long awareness can operate before stability is threatened. Without this boundary, intelligence would undermine itself. Sleep protects the mind by setting a limit that cannot be crossed repeatedly without cost. It is the final barrier that preserves coherence in a system designed to accumulate complexity. When sleep is reduced or postponed, the boundary it provides does not disappear. It becomes strained. The human brain continues to operate, but it does so by shifting priorities in ways that protect survival rather than clarity. From a biological perspective, this is a controlled response, not a sudden failure. As internal pressure builds, the brain begins to simplify. It reduces precision in attention, narrows emotional range, and relies more heavily on familiar patterns. This allows basic functioning to continue, but it comes at a cost. Complex reasoning becomes harder. Emotional balance requires more effort, and perception loses subtlety. These changes are often misunderstood as personal weakness or lack of discipline, but they are protective adjustments. The brain is conserving resources under sustained demand. Other species experience similar adjustments, but the effects are less noticeable because their cognitive load is lower. Humans feel these shifts more strongly because awareness itself is a major source of demand. Memory, imagination, and self-evaluation continue even as stability declines. Wakefulness continues, but it is compromised. The brain operates closer to its limits, leaving less margin for recovery. Over time, this increases sensitivity to stress, reduces tolerance for uncertainty, and weakens emotional regulation. These effects accumulate quietly. They do not announce themselves clearly because the brain adapts by lowering expectations. What once felt sharp begins to feel normal only because the reference point has shifted. From an evolutionary standpoint, this gradual decline was not meant to be sustained. Sleep existed to prevent exactly this outcome by restoring full capacity before simplification became necessary. In environments where sleep was unavoidable, the boundary held firm. In modern conditions, where sleep can be delayed repeatedly, the boundary is tested more often. Each test increases pressure rather than removing the limit. The brain responds by demanding deeper or longer sleep to recover lost ground. This response is consistent with known principles of biological regulation. Systems under prolonged strain increase recovery demand rather than eliminating it. Sleep therefore becomes more urgent, not optional. Understanding this helps explain why chronic sleep reduction leads to persistent fatigue rather than adaptation. The brain does not become more efficient, it becomes more cautious. It trades complexity for stability. While this preserves basic functioning, it diminishes the qualities that define human intelligence, such as flexible thinking, emotional nuance, and sustained attention. Sleep protects these qualities by restoring capacity before simplification sets in. When sleep is insufficient, the boundary remains, but it is enforced through gradual decline rather than clear interruption. This makes the cost harder to see but no less real. Humans need sleep not only to rest, but to prevent the slow erosion of mental function that occurs when limits are repeatedly ignored. Sleep stands between full cognitive capacity and a narrowed version of awareness. It preserves the range of human thought by preventing continuous operation under strain. Sleep cannot be replaced by discipline, habit, or long-term adaptation because it is not a behavior the human brain can train itself to abandon. From a biological perspective, sleep is a structural requirement, not a preference. Discipline can delay sleep, routine can reshape schedules, and motivation can extend wakefulness. But none of these change how the brain restores stability. They only change when recovery is allowed to occur. Over time, the cost of delay accumulates. The brain does not adapt by needing less sleep. It adapts by lowering performance until recovery becomes unavoidable. This is why sleep pressure returns even after long periods of restriction. The underlying mechanisms remain unchanged. Humans did not evolve systems that can permanently replace deep disengagement with effort or control. Other species may rely on lighter rest or flexible alertness, but the human brain depends on complete withdrawal from awareness to preserve coherence. When this withdrawal is postponed repeatedly, the brain protects itself by narrowing function, not by eliminating the need for sleep. Understanding this clarifies why sleep stands as a non-negotiable boundary. It is not defeated by willpower, optimized away by efficiency, or overcome through conditioning. Sleep enforces limits that awareness cannot recognize on its own. It exists to prevent intelligence from exhausting itself. Humans need sleep more than other species, because their minds can push beyond safe limits without immediate warning. Sleep intervenes where conscious control fails. It marks the point where recovery is no longer optional, but necessary.